Okay, and is next The Tide at Sunrise, Russo-Japanese War, 1904 to 1905. It's an MMP International Games Series game. Let's see, what can we say? So, SPI put out a game on the Russo-Japanese War. I don't remember what it's called. Maybe just Russo-Japanese War, but I couldn't find it. I saw it a long time ago. Maybe something Rising Sun. I don't know. Anyway, a friend of mine picked it up. He got a great deal from another friend of mine who ran a game store. I was kind of cursing myself for not being the one to see it first. And I've been looking for a game on this war for a long time, and that one goes for a fortune. So I decided instead to pick this up. I was able to get it reasonably cheap used. Maybe not that cheap. Now it's probably on sale about the price that I paid, but I maybe saved a little bit. And I did get a bonus in it, which is the guy who played it had, or I bought it from, had printed out the optional Naval card on some cardstock and the rules for that. So I probably come out ahead, given that everything's here. The only negative is he did some highlighting, but very, very pale, so it almost doesn't affect me at all. And we also had some other thingies in here, like a review of the game from the Board Game Life. I'll look that over at some point, but as of right now, I want to get enough of an intro down that we can understand what's going on in play. I'm going to try not to go through the rules case by case or anything like that. I know I have a tendency to do that because I'm trying to learn the rules at the same time. Let's take a little look at the components. I know I'll cover them in my review, but one thing that strikes me is the map is beautiful looking. There's no question. The counters are quite lovely too. But I'm finding already a little difficulty reading the map. There's sort of a darkness to it all that makes it, that may not come across at all in the video, but that makes it a little hard, and with my eyes going bad as they are, I'm finding myself having some difficulty seeing some of this. Okay, so our counters, and this is actually really, the core of this game is very much a normal, simple war game. The naval rules are a little different, but they're similar to other games like it. And there's not a lot to it. 12 pages of rules, fairly large type, and then an additional few pages for the naval rules as well if you want to play with them. I've heard some people say they don't really matter. I'm not sure they don't. To me, some of the people have been complaining that the game is unbalanced in favor of in favor of the Russians. The victory point levels are the same whether you play with the naval rules or not for victory in the game, and my impression is that the naval rules should give the Japanese something of an advantage. I may be mistaken there, and well, we'll see how much of a bonus they are. They certainly can't hurt you as far as I can see. Okay, what do we got? Well, we got our standard units, which have a strength and a movement allowance. Some of the units have a flip side for a disorganized or reduced, however you want to look at that. Reduced units can be brought up to full strength in this one. I don't know if this is supposed to be set somewhere, but let's see. We got a number of tracks on the board here. We're going to be dealing with replacement points to repair units with. As an option, you get basically the choice to whether you want to bring in reinforcements or bring them in as replacement points for your already damaged stuff. Victory point track, turn record track. Up here, what is this? This is going to be the transport points that the Japanese, they're the dark, and the Russians have as to how much they can bring in for reinforcements. And there are things you can do to influence that throughout the play. Got two different combat results tables, depending on whether or not the fight happens in a fort. There are some forts over here near Port Arthur, and that's it. couple of kind of weird things that stand out on the map. There's these peaks, which have a little bit of influence on mountain transit. And we got victory point spaces here that we're going to have to worry about. There's basically a few ways to get victory points in the land game. They come from holding victory point cities, but also from attacking enemy and destroying enemy units. Sequence of play is fairly simple. It's an I go, you go game. Japanese start off, they have a naval phase. The Russians declare whether or not their fleets are, that's really a joint naval phase, whether their fleets are sortying. And if they do, they get to roll some dice on the naval combat table, which has to be somewhere here. Here it is. Oh boy, that's unreadable. Depending on which fleet is sortying. And then there's also another table for evacuation of Port Arthur. Those rules get superseded. The naval phase is going to be taken over by a more detailed naval game where you kind of handle the tactical battle in some detail. The goal to that, though, is largely to do raiding to affect the Japanese transport points in the core game. Okay, then you get your reinforcements. The Japanese are going to decide how many of their transport points they're going to use for bringing reinforcements onto the map, into Korea, I guess, and how many they want to use for replacing units that are already there. And we got normal movement rules, and a combat phase, which I believe is optional, whether or not you fight. You check supply, and then you're allowed to recover units that are in supply using your replacement points. Then the Russians get the same sequence of play, it looks like, with one exception. Well, their transport is handled a little differently. It's going to be based on this Colonel Akashi's secret operations, which will be disrupting the flow of Russian reinforcements to the east, both politically and through other means. That's all abstracted because he's, I don't know, where is he? St. Petersburg or something? I don't know. Here we got him. Yeah, and in Finland. And okay. Our zones of control, 6 hexes around every undisrupted unit. Extends into most terrain types and across river hexes. Japanese zones of control don't extend into the forts. You have to stop when you enter a zone of control. You can exit, but you can't go from one to the other. You know, pretty... My wrist is killing me trying to hold this. Pretty common rules for this. You can't retreat through them. You can't trace supply through them, period. Even if there's a friendly unit there. So your front lines are not going to have, you know, little bulges coming out that are 1 hex wide. Okay, disrupted units aren't going to be allowed to enter an enemy zone of control, and if they start the turn in one, they have to leave or else they'll be destroyed. Stacking is 2 divisions. What you'll see is the big units in this game are divisions, and 2 brigades count as a division. Stacking penalties, overstacking penalties are extreme. The enemy gets to destroy your units. Obviously, I won't play that way because I'm too clumsy. You know, if it's a mistake, it probably didn't have any effect. I'll figure out some other solution. Movement, pretty standard. There's going to be a terrain effects chart here, which gives the movement point cost through different hexes. Mountains themselves. So we got the rough. I believe the mountains are impassable. It doesn't look like it. Let's see if that's the case. I thought they were impassable. Yes. Okay. 2 Russians, 1 Japanese can move by rail each turn. And basically you spend half your movement points and you can move along controlled rail hexes as far as you like. Now I have 2 of these little rail control markers, which I guess are put down for areas of the rail network that Japan owns, because they'll probably just have a segment of it. I think it's conceivable they might have more than one. And I don't know what. They say to use them to mark the areas of Russian rail control. Well, so the Russian garrison units, which are these 5-2 units here, are not allowed to move outside of the forts. And if you create marine unit as well, which I believe is this one, by pulling sailors off your ships, you end up also not being able to leave Port Arthur with them. And if you're forced out, you're destroyed. Combat. You choose whether or not to fight. You don't have to use all the units in a hex to fight a single enemy hex, but a single enemy hex has to be attacked as a cohesive force. Artillery has the capability for ranged fire, and here are the different artillery units. We'll be seeing these. Some of them come into the game right to begin with, so there's a couple of Japanese artillery here in Korea. So the artillery is basically able to either attack as part of, or alone, adjacent to itself, or I believe it's a 1 hex jump. As long as it's not in an enemy zone of control. I'm looking to see what the range is there. Yeah, 2 hexes away. It can't fire alone unless there's a unit adjacent to the enemy tacked as some sort of spotter. For the actual combat, well, nothing too exciting there. You figure out your odds, and you might have shifts in play due to terrain. I wanted to make sure that wasn't just a multiplier. The odds can go off the table in order to account for shifts. So if I have 8-to-1 odds, it takes 1 shift to get onto that 7-to-1 column, as an example. Just because we're using shifts for things. The actual losses, the losses are more detailed. Take a look at the tables for a moment. Than you'd see in a lot of these more simpler type of games. So we've got an exchange which is pretty normal, except for one thing. Basically, every unit takes every unit on the weaker side takes 1 step loss, and then the attacker has to take step losses to units with combat strength, totaling what the stronger side, totaling what the weaker side took. Now, I think that can result in a unit taking step losses on its full strength side and on its weaker strength side. That's not really spelled out here. Maybe in the errata here, I don't know. A retreat is a 2-hex retreat, which could cause pursuit. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Defender disrupted, all the defending units get flipped over. Defender eliminated, all the defending units get eliminated. Then we have retreats, disruptions, and eliminates for the attacker. Now, here we start getting into some of the more interesting things. There are different types of exchanges. Now, that may seem kind of cool, but to me, the combat result table looks too small to handle the number of different results that there are. I almost wish there was like a D10 result table or something to fill in more of these different types. A double exchange. Oh shit, sorry about that. My zoom got stuck. See, there it goes again. Crap. The camera's getting shitty. That's going to cause me problems. All defending units end up on the disrupted side, and then the attacker is going to take twice the combat strength of what the defender takes. Now this is a little different. The other exchange is the lower strength takes the first result. Here it's definitely shit. Here it's definitely the defender. Wow, this is going to be really a problem. Okay. Exchange retreat. The defenders are all disrupted and retreat 2 hexes. And then the attacker disrupts a number of strength points equal to the defender, and then they get any undisrupted remaining attacking units can pursue. Double exchange retreat sounds like it's a combination of the two. The retreats themselves, you can't go through a zone of control, can't go through impassable shit. You have to retreat into a hex, or to a hex, in which you can legally stack. You must go into supply if possible. Now this is the one time when the stacking restriction would take place. If you can only retreat into a place you can't legally stack, you still have to retreat. So then the overstacking penalty would come into play, and I'd have to look that up in that case. We're not going to worry too much about that kind of crap, are we? The unit has to retreat towards a friendly victory city or friendly Port Arthur fort, or friendly controlled port if it's the Japanese. And we got ports along here, which are probably going to allow us to pull our supplies and maybe even reinforcements in from. Now you can go through China if you wish, and in fact some of the Russians seem to start in China. Unless I have my east-west confused. That way should be west, and they very clearly say west of the Yalu River on God damn it. This is killing me. On the river though. Okay, the pursuit is 3 hexes for cav and 2 hexes for infantry. And artillery only get 1 hex. You must first enter the hex that the defender left, but then you can spread out wherever you like, kind of like an exploitation type situation. The units which pursue are going to be in supply for the following supply and regroup phase, even if they can't trace a supply line. Now this can cause some interesting situations because you could be in supply due to a pursuit, attack again later, and be in more extended supply. We'll see how much that actually affects the game, but the way I read it, it looked really weird in there. You can't enter an enemy zone of control voluntarily or participate in an attack. I'm sorry, disrupted units. Yeah, we know about that already. Reinforcements and replacements. So this is going to be kind of interesting. So each turn the player gets a number of transport points from the turn record track, and they get these reduced either by the naval results or by the Colonel Akashi. They can also be reduced for the Russians, I believe, due to winter. I'm not positive about that, but I think, yeah, over here. However many points you get is that can be used to bring new units from your force pool and turning transport points into replacement points. And the Russian player has to decide whether his replacement points go into Port Arthur or the rest of the board. Now, once Port Arthur's cut from the rail line, they won't be able to add replacement points to them. So that means, shit, this is really crappy. That means that you probably want to throw a lot of your replacements at the Port Arthur if you're planning on holding it for the game, or for a large part of the game. Replacement points are accumulated but can never be converted back to transport points. Replacements go on the map. Reinforcements are placed on the map. No. Okay. Russian reinforcements arrive. They can be placed in adjacent to a list of cities, including Port Arthur. They move normally in the following movement phase, including rail movement. They can attack normally. The Russian player cannot send reinforcements to Port Arthur if the rail's cut. They can't go in a Japanese line of zone of control. If there's nowhere they can place them, they can't bring them in. No Russian European divisions can enter on turns 1 or 2. The Cav can't enter on turn 1 or 2 either. And they get 2 per turn after that. Now, what I'm not seeing is what the cost of those replacements is. You know, and that's something I just have no idea about. Any clarification here? We got some. Nope. Well, there's got to be an answer to this. And I'm just not seeing it. Does not count against rail movement capacity. Yeah, I'm just not seeing anything about, you know, how much transport it costs to bring any given replacement or reinforcement into play, nor how many replacement points you get. But I'm assuming that's 1 for 1. That's not really spelled out. I'm kind of assuming at this point, unless I see otherwise, that it's 1 for 1 counters. You know, so you want to bring the best stuff in, like a division costs the same as a brigade. For whatever reason. That doesn't please me, but okay. Japanese reinforcements come by sea. As long as Port Arthur is intact, the squadron is intact and capable of sortying, the Japanese reinforcements can land in any coastal hex east of Nanshan. 0707 to 0131. I think this is 0707. And this would be 0131, so they can come in here. If the Russian player fails to sortie from Port Arthur for 2 turns, or if the squadron sorties and is destroyed, well, that may change due to the rules, the naval rules. Or if the squadron cannot sortie due to damage from a previous combat, then the Japanese reinforcements can land anywhere on the map, any coastal hex, that's free of enemy zones of control. Once they land, they can move half their printed allowance. The Japanese occupying a port, beginning the next turn, they can land up to 2 divisions per turn at the port, using their full movement allowance after landing. Now, what's not clear here is, well, gosh, can't I do that anyway with this? I mean, huh? I don't know. I don't see any reason why I can't land at this port without capturing it. So we'll just ignore that rule because that's not really clarified very well. Okay, no Japanese reserve. It may be that I can't bring divisions in otherwise. I don't know. Doesn't say I can't. No Japanese reserve brigades can enter on turns 1 or 2. The Japanese artillery cannot enter until turn 7, or if a Japanese attack against the fort fails, and that's basically not succeeding in taking it. If that happens, they can be brought in the next Japanese reinforcement phase. Beginning on turn 7 or earlier, you can bring one 28-centimeter artillery unit. These are the 10-2s, the big siege guns. But yeah, these rules are not as complete as one would hope. Russian supply sources are on the north edge of the map and Port Arthur. The Japanese supply sources are occupied ports and any hex adjacent to Korea. Here. To control a port, the Japanese have to have been the last to move through it. You can trace a line of any length to enemy, not through enemy occupied zone of control, not through full mountain hexes, but you can go through mountain hexes that have a peak or a road. That's probably what I was thinking. It is possible to move through them. It's just not possible to trace your supply through them. Okay. And I guess I can't hold this at kind of a medium level of zoom. It's either all the way down or all the way up. Okay, the unit itself can be in a zone. If you're out of supply during supply and regroup phase, you take a hit, a disruption hit. Unless you pursuit. During supply and recovery, you can use your replacement points to recover your disrupted units back to full strength. The cost is listed in the unit data table. Okay, maybe this will lead the cost to transferring units. Where is this thing? Unit data table. Aha! It's down here. So, yeah, there's the transport cost. There's the number of replacement costs to fix it. There's going to be the victory points that you spend, that you lose if you get the unit destroyed. And there is the total number of that unit that you have there. Great. So that answers one big question. I still don't know about those Japanese divisions. Can they not come in until I have a port? What's up with that, right? I don't know. Seems like it would kind of... I don't have any real restriction other than the transport limit to what I can bring on the board otherwise. And are those two divisions in addition to other stuff? What's up with them? No clue. Okay. If units are destroyed, they can't be brought back into play. Russian units on or west of the Nanshan Fort Hex must use Port Arthur replacement points to recover. Other units use general ones. China. Okay, remember what I said that you can enter China? Yeah, but if you do, either through movement, retreat, pursuit, the other player gets victory points equal to the elimination value of whatever violating units there are. So that's a pretty bad choice unless you really need to, like, encircle someone or you are forced to retreat there. The forts. Japanese zones don't extend into the forts. When they attack a fort, you use the fort combat table. Once the Japanese occupy a fort, it's destroyed for the rest of the game and no longer has any effect. Japanese units that pursue into a fort end up ending their pursuit there. All right, I'm going to pause for a bit because my wrist is killing me with this. Okay, now let's look at the base game's naval combat. This gets replaced by these, and I have to say I'm not thrilled with the idea of let's release a game without all the components. They give you the counters when you buy the game, but they don't give you this little piece of paper. I've got cardstock instead, and they don't give you the additional rules. Now, I don't know how much full-color glossy rules cost. I'm largely opposed to them. I'll show you one reason why, perhaps. Let's see. That's what a pencil does on them. So that means, and it doesn't really erase either, that means that if there's errata, which there assuredly is, and there are issues that I've identified that I don't believe the errata that I have covered, you have one choice of what to write with, and that is essentially a marker. You can use, I've got a Sharpie that I use for glossy rules. It's got to be cheaper, I assume, to print black and white on even a cheaper stock of paper. This paper does not feel all that flimsy. It disturbs me when I see every time I see these glossy pages. I know that I've just gotten an inferior product, because it means if there is any mistake, I cannot correct it. And MMP's been moving this way. Boy, was there a problem with Lincoln's War with this, but you know, where they're rewriting the whole rules, and hey, now I can download a set of rules that look like this, right? But I can't make corrections on this, and it's just a terrible way of trying to produce the rules. And if they could have saved enough money by going to a different format without the full color rules, and put out the rules the game was actually supposed to have in the rule book, instead of trying to keep it to 12 pages of glossy rules, you know, put it out to 20 pages. Yeah, it's not even that. What do we got here? 4 extra pages of rules. 16 pages paper rules, you know. Why not? And this extra piece of cardstock wouldn't have cost much either. You know, it just, when you have to half P&P your game in order to get the full thing, it's disturbing. Anyway, I shouldn't be going into that while I'm here, but when I see these kind of, you know, there's a side where you could say, okay, look, you know, we'll provide you the components and sell you the rules. Yeah, the rules will be online in a PDF form. That makes more sense. I wouldn't buy it. I wouldn't touch a game where I have to print out the rules. But here, I'm paying for a rule book that is uncorrectable, and we know there's going to be errors in an MMP game. We just know it. All right. Where are we? So the basic naval combat. Each player rolls 1 die and adds the 2 together. And we look at the fleet sortie table. Okay. If the fleet conducting the sortie suffers damage, it's unable to sortie again for the number of turns indicated on the table. And you don't worry about the Japanese squadron here. As long as the Russian Port Arthur squadron is capable of sortying, the Japanese placement is restricted. There was a further aspect to that if it hasn't sortied for a couple of turns. In addition, Japanese-controlled ports west of Port Arthur may not act as supply sources. Still nothing about that division, Once eliminated, a fleet can never attempt another sortie. The Japanese transport reductions from the naval combat table are permanent and cumulative throughout the game. I don't know if that's what this does, but we'll see. So, if it's victorious, we reduce transports. Shit, there it goes again by 2. Yeah, I can't keep this steady. So I can't zoom in anymore, I guess. And likewise here, this will reduce transports by half. Okay. So that's all you do for the naval combat in the base game. The Port Arthur fleet, if the Japanese attacks Lushun, which has to be this here, with at least one 28-centimeter siege artillery unit, the Port Arthur fleet can never sortie again, and the restrictions of 13.1.3 are lifted. That's the supply around the port. The Port Arthur fleet, if without a Port Arthur under siege marker, can be traded by the Russian for their 5-2 Marine unit. If the Russian does this, the Port Arthur fleet may no longer sortie, but may attempt to evacuate. You may also place the 5-2 Marine unit if Marine conversion is allowed on the naval combat table. You can only do this once per game. Once the Japanese 28-centimeter siege artillery has attacked Port Arthur, the Port Arthur fleet can no longer sortie, but it can attempt to escape to Vladivostok. This is resolved in naval evacuation of Port Arthur fleet, which is just another table. Vladivostok fleet cannot sortie between turns of 8 through 12 due to the weather. The Russian transport. So they have a base transport listed over here on the turn record track. Let's see if we can get those numbers. I believe they're the lighter numbers. And yeah, I can't hold anything steady anymore. That's life. Wow, it's zooming all by itself. What else? Reductions from Colonel Akashi's secret operations are permanent and cumulative. And, well, we're not sure how that works yet. So how about Colonel Ashkaki? During Russian transport, the Japanese player rolls a die and advances the marker on his secret operations equal to the result. Once the marker reaches the 20 space or more, we're going to have additional results here. The Japanese player uses the number just rolled and applies the result listed at the bottom of the current column. So wait. If the value was 28 and the player rolls a 5, the new value is 33, and you look at the effect on the 30 column. Whatever the effect is, I don't know. Use the... God, tell me how to tie my shoes here. Subtract the resulting number from the Russian player's transport points for the current turn. Okay, well, that does not answer my question. Let's try to read this again. If you roll a 5, the new value is 33, and you look at the effect on the 30 column. Okay. Son of a bitch, we got no camera anymore. All right, well, there we go. So we're looking for an effect here, right? What could the effect be? It could be these dice here. They could mean something, but that's not explained here. If the player rolls a 5, the new value, and looks at the effect, use the 20 column if the total is 20 to 29, and use the 30 if it's 30 to 39. Okay, whatever. Subtract the resulting number from the Russian player's transport points. Okay, so a die roll of 1 or 2 results in a strike, and a 6 results in a riot. So I guess they didn't really explain what's going on here at all until that last example. But if you're at the 20 column or higher, and your die roll is one of the ones listed, you have the effect listed in terms of number of transport points. And there we'll start drifting back. During turns 8 through 12, the Russian player rolls a die. If a 6 is rolled, he loses 2 points from his transport points from the current turn only. And we have setup here. Turn 1, special rules. No naval phase or Japanese reinforcement on turn 1. Japanese player shifts all his attacks 1 column to the right on the combat. A surprise. Russian units in Nanshan, Darien, and Port Arthur may not move on turn 1. I don't know where Darien is. Is that here? Yeah. So it's all the Port Arthur garrison stuff. Reinforcements and replacement points arrive. Normally, our victory conditions is 70 or more victory points for the Japanese. Otherwise, the Russians win. Now, victory points come from the towns, from the values that are listed on the towns. Let's see if we can zoom in without creating a problem. There we go. Elimination of enemy units, which are listed here, and they're also on the unit data table. Naval sortie results. Apparently those will generate victory points as well. And neutral zone violation. Remember when you take China. And then we have the optional naval game. Okay. Let's take a look at this. So we set up most of the fleets over in Port Arthur, a couple of cruisers and destroyers in Vladivostok. We also have a pile, and that's all set here. The Japanese are in Japan, over here. And we have a pile of European ships steaming around to get to the crisis. Okay. The naval unit has a number of values on it. It has the name, a range at which it can fire. If it has torpedoes, I don't know if you can see that. And then over here you have your primary armament and your secondary armament. And the higher the number, the better on these. And this will indicate that it can fire 3 times. Okay. No naval phase on turn 1, yeah. The Vladivostok's fleet may not sortie on turn 8 to 12. Ships may not transfer to another port. Togo. Alright. Togo points. I've got a little marker somewhere for him up here on the victory point track. Those are going to be the naval engagement points. And you get what they're going to be is they're going to add to the total victory points that the Japanese have. Now, my presumption is that the points on the naval combat table are meant to represent the same points. So that was the thing where I thought, well, maybe because people think Russia wins all the time, and some people seem to, maybe that's the differential. Maybe they're playing just a land game. But it seems like there was at least an intention to balance the two. So if the Russians, okay, so there's going to be points basically for the combats itself and the results of that, but also for not sortying and for battleships not evacuating when the port at Port Arthur is taken. Okay, so what happens is the Russian player just declares whether or not he's going to sortie with his Vladivostok fleet, and he must either sort it or not. And if he decides to sortie, he decides which ships he's sending and puts those aside. And he puts an unspotted marker in the open sea. And we got a couple of these markers sitting out here. And a bunch of little markers for the naval combat. So he would go out there and say, hey, I'm out there. Great. He can also declare whether he'll sortie with Port Arthur fleet, in which case, if he does, he secretly decides what's going out, and he puts an unspotted marker in the coastal waters space. If he declines to sortie either fleet, the naval phase ends, and if the Port Arthur fleet has not sortied, the restrictions of 8.31 for Japanese supplies and such not are lifted for the turn. The Japanese player is now allowed to sortie, assuming the Russians did, all or some or none of his units that are not under a port marker. If he doesn't sortie anything, we jump forward and the Japanese get a penalty of 1 Togo point for each Russian fleet that's sorted. Now that can't go below 0. So that is one slight difference. If this generates negative points for the Japanese, there would be a difference there on the victory points. If the Japanese sorties any units, he secretly sets them aside and puts an unspotted marker in the open sea box. Well, we don't have enough unspotted markers. We only have 2. I guess we'll have to use something else. Okay. If the Vladivostok fleet is sortied and the Japanese fleet sortied as well, both fleets reveal their ships. First, Russian and Japanese have the option to withdraw after that. And that'll cause points on the Togo chart. You can see here Russian and Japanese withdrawal points. If neither withdraws, a combat takes place. If one side withdraws, all ships are placed back in their respective bases with port markers on them. Now the port markers are important if I can find them, which I can't. Well, they're important because you can't sail out when you have one, but I'm not seeing them. Maybe they're on the other side of the unspotted. Okay. I'm not sure spotting is handled in this, to tell you the truth. Okay. The Japanese player may choose to move into the coastal water, which maybe this had different rules in Japan and they changed them. It certainly seems like a very simple game. The Japanese player can choose to move into the coastal waters box and engage Russian ships that are in that box after any battle there. And he must pass the mine roll to see which ships make it in. And then there's another chance of withdrawal. If the Japanese withdraw, the Japanese transport points are reduced by 4 points for the turn. Now, if the Japanese don't sortie, it doesn't seem to affect their transport points. Ooh. I guess the difference here is you sent the fleet out so the transports think they're protected, so they might be operating over here. If the Japanese decide not to enter the coastal waters box, the Russian player may now choose to enter the open seas box. If he does, he must roll for passing the mines, and then both sides show their their open seas fleets, and either side has the withdrawal chance, again affecting Togo points. If the Japanese withdraw from combat, their transport points are reduced by 6 this turn. Again, that doesn't seem to matter. Let's see. If the Russian player declines, if the Japanese does not sortie, go to step 5. Looks like, oh, transport points are reduced by half if you don't sortie. Which might be less, but it's only this turn. Unlike the rules for the more abstracted naval combat, it's only temporary, the effects. If the Russians choose not to enter the open sea box after the Japanese decline to enter the coastal, the sortie is completed and both sides return their ships to their ports, getting a port marker on top of the sortied ships. Okay. We don't know the effect of those port markers. I think they prevent you from sortying the next turn. All right, to go through the minefields. The Russian battleships make it on anything but a 5 or a 6, and their cruisers and destroyers make it on anything but a 6. For the Japanese, all ships make it across on anything but a 6. Anything that's returned to port here gets a port marker on it. Each player secretly picks 2 maneuver chits. Okay, maneuver chits are these. Full speed ahead. I don't think low fuel is one of them. Again, I don't think there are rules for this, for the fuel. So there are other counters that are not included in the combat, the naval combat rules they gave. Again, I think there may have been an interesting game that got cut out saying, hey, Americans aren't going to play interesting game. So what do you pick? You pick either full speed ahead, right? I think. All right, well, there are 4 of those chits. Yeah, this isn't all very well explained, I'm afraid. Well, maybe not. Okay, so you might pick full speed ahead. You might pick HP, hard port. I guess you can pick any 2. Full speed ahead, some turns, some other things. And that ends up getting you to a matrix. That matrix is going to determine what the combat what the combat is resolved as. The range at which the combat's resolved, how many rounds there are, and whether one side or the other has the or both have the ability to fire broadsides. If one side, and again, this isn't very well explained either, I don't know what the fuel markers are for. I don't know what a lot of these markers are for. The hit markers do matter. If the Russians get a broadside advantage and the Japanese do not, they can turn it into to crossing the T if they get a 1 or 2. And the Japanese succeed in making that conversion on 1 through 4. Now here's where I think there are errors. The European fleet must subtract 1 from this die roll during the Battle of Tsushima. The Japanese may add 1 to this die roll during the Battle of Tsushima. Well, certainly if I'm given the option to add 1, I ain't ever going to do it. So I think they went in the wrong direction there. Yeah, given my knowledge of Tsushima, which is limited, but it was one heck of a Japanese victory, I'm assuming that they crossed the T and the Russians were kind of lackluster. Combat's going to happen in rounds, either 1 or 2. After the second round, everything goes back in the port with a port marker on it. To begin the round, the Russian player places his ships in a line. The Japanese player then engages the Russian ships one at a time, putting them up against the Japanese engages the Russian, putting his ships up against the Russian ones. If the Japanese has excess ships, he can set the extra aside, or the extra ones against other Russian ships. So he can gang up on them 2-1, 3-1, whatever. But he has to do each one as equally as possible, basically. The Japanese then does the combat. Now, the way the combat's going to be done... No, wait. No, after this is done, the Japanese places his ships in a line just as the Russian did, and the Russian conducts his pairing exactly the same way and resolves his combat. And results won't be applied until both sides have fired, so it's simultaneous. Both sides get to choose their targets. A ship that's firing rolls a die for its primary armament and 1 for its secondary armament. If they have torpedoes, they can fire it instead of both of those. Cruisers and destroyers have a ×3 on their counter. We can see if we zoom in. And that indicates basically how many ships are in the squadron and how many dice they get to roll at once. Primary or secondary armaments cause damage if the firing die roll is equal to or less than the target's armament rating. So, this is another one of those, I don't know if they got it right. That means if I'm shooting at this, I'm trying to hit his primary armament rating of 2. Which means something totally different from what I'd think. What I'd think is I'd be trying to make my own armament rating, and that's how I'm going to play it, because there are real problems if you try to play this how it's read. For example, this ship is really difficult to hit with main guns. That might make sense. It gets 3 secondary armament shots. It's really good at shooting down this ship. So obviously I think there's another error there. And that leads one with very little confidence. Obviously there's not going to be a errata to this in this. Maybe that gets cleared up somewhere. And maybe they tell me how to use the fuel markers and everything. It was a half-assed attempt to add rules to a game. But apparently the original had all these rules. So blame MMP, not the designer. Okay. So when a battleship gets hit, it gets flipped over, and I bet you it has weaker gunnery factors, indicating... Whoa. Yeah. No, it has the same factors. So the guns are just as effective. Cruisers and destroyers get a hit. That will reduce the number of dice they can make. Once they take 3 hits, they're essentially destroyed. Now, at long range, you subtract 2 from the primary armament attack die rolls. Again, I think that's an error. I'm trying to roll low here to hit. So subtracting 2 means that I'm making it more likely at long range than at short range with all these weapons. Torpedoes, I'm not sure that there are rules for them. Yeah, this is great, isn't it? This is what happens when you put your rules online. Yay, another winner. gotta learn to stop buying MMP games. The Gamers line is great. Everything else really questionable. I enjoyed Warriors of God. I enjoyed, I think they did Kingdom of Heaven as well, which I think is an outstanding game. But so many of their games are just so problematic. And obviously this one's one of them. Okay, so I guess torpedoes simply don't work. Maybe I'll be able to find rules that actually go with the counters that the game comes with. Okay. So at the end of the first round of combat, the Russian player first, then the Japanese player has the choice to lay smoke. If they do so, they don't get to fire, and they extend the range of the combat. If it's already a long range, they break off. Do we have any rules for torpedoes here? Oh, torpedoes cause damage on a 1 through 4. Okay, sweet. And they only work at short range. Okay, then the ships go back with their port markers. Now, ships under a port marker are not allowed to sortie. Port markers are removed on a recovery die roll during the recovery segment. This can be kept secret from the enemy, and that's probably a really wise idea, because the whole naval engagement thing, why are you would send your entire fleet out, probably. There's no reason to bluff with that, unless you don't want to sortie them because you don't want them getting tired. So you'll send like a destroyer out, and the enemy won't know what you sent. But again, not knowing what's available would help a great deal with that. During recovery, each player rolls 1 die for each of his undamaged ships under a port marker. And Russian ships recover on a 1 through 3 in Port Arthur, 1 through 4 in Vladivostok, and Japanese also 1 through 4. Damaged unit ships have to be repaired. The repair rolls are the same as the recovery. You make the repair rolls after recovery rolls. If a damaged ship is repaired, it keeps its port marker and may roll for recovery during the next naval phase. So you don't get a recovery check while you're damaged, is I guess what they're saying. Port Arthur evacuation and destruction. Remember, evacuation of Port Arthur is one of these charts here, so this has to be replaced in the naval rules. The Russian player can evacuate the Port Arthur fleet at the beginning of a naval phase by announcing this to the Japanese player. Play proceeds as normal, except the Japanese must enter the coastal waters box in order to have combat. If the Port Arthur fleet is able to move to the open sea box, all its ships are evacuated and removed from the game. The Russian player does not have to roll for mines. All ships are assumed to be able to leave the coastal water box and escape. Okay. At the end of the game, the players conduct the Battle of Tsushima. All the Japanese ships in port are automatically repaired and recovered and put in the open sea box. All ships of the Russian European fleet now make a minefields roll to enter the open sea box. Now, they normally wouldn't have to, I believe, because they're over at Vladivostok. So I don't know. I don't know what's up with that. Or maybe they're not. Maybe they just aren't on the board yet. I think that's it. Historically, they showed up and fought, so I don't know. The players now conduct 4 rounds of combat, from which the Russians are prohibited from laying smoke. And I guess that's about it. And we'll see what we got here in terms of playability. I wish I knew what fuel meant. I don't know if there were counters. So one assumes, since this came from another game, that the counters actually represent the original game, rather than just, hey, some additional counters got thrown in that have no rules to go with them. So I don't know. And there goes my Zoom again. Okay, let's send this off.